Wyoming Territory, 1883, and the wind came down off the Wind River Range in early June, carrying the smell of new grass and the particular electric tension of a storm 3 days off, the kind of wind that put every green-broke colt on the Mercer place on edge before noon. Louisa Rain rode into the yard at the Mercer Ranch a little before 8 in the morning on a mare thin from the road, and asked at the bunkhouse door whether there was work for a woman who could handle stock. The laughing started before she finished the sentence. "Handle stock," said a lean cowhand named Dutch, wiping his hands on a rag and grinning at the others. "You hear that, boys? Lady wants to handle stock." He nodded past her, toward the round pen at the far end of the yard, where a gray stallion stood alone against the rail, ears pinned, watching the whole conversation with the flat, wary stillness of an animal that had learned, thoroughly, to trust nothing that walked on 2 legs. "There's stock wants handling right yonder. 6 men on this outfit have tried him this spring. 6 men have hit the dirt, one of 'em twice, in the same afternoon, and Pardo there busted his wrist on the second try and hasn't worked since. You go right ahead and handle him, ma'am, and we'll all be glad of the entertainment. What's his story? Come up from a bad outfit down in Colorado, half-starved and rope-scarred, before the boss bought him sight unseen on the strength of his bloodline. He's got Ghost's own sire in him 3 generations back, best running stock in the territory, if a man could ever sit him long enough to know it." Dutch's grin had not faded. Boss has sunk near $200 into that horse hoping to breed off him, and got nothing back but a busted wrist and a bad reputation for the outfit. You want to try your hand? Be our guest. Ain't nobody here going to stop a woman from proving herself a fool. Wade Mercer heard the commotion from the barn and came out wiping grease from a bridle buckle to find half his crew gathered at the round pen fence, laughing at a woman he had never seen before, who was standing at the gate with her hand already on the latch. He was 34 years old, and he had inherited the ranch from an uncle 4 years back, along with 1,100 acres of good grass, a herd thinned by 2 hard winters, and a breeding program he had staked everything on rebuilding around one exceptional gray stud. A stud that had, in 6 months, cost him a hand's wages in doctor bills, a summer's worth of lost working time, and very nearly his last reserve of hope that the Mercer place would still be standing come the bank's note in the fall. "That's enough," Wade said, coming through the crowd. "Ma'am, I don't know what these men have told you, but that horse has put 6 grown men on the ground this spring, one of them hard enough he hasn't worked since. This isn't a show. I didn't come for a show, Mr. Mercer. I came looking for work, and your man there made it plain what kind of proof you'd want of it." Louisa Rain's voice was even and unhurried, and she did not look at the laughing men at all, only at the horse. "I'll ask for 1 hour. If I've made no progress with him in that time, I'll saddle up and ride on, and you'll have lost nothing but an hour's daylight. And if you get yourself hurt in the meantime, then it's my own risk taken on my own say-so, and I'll sign whatever paper you like saying as much before I go through that gate." She met his eyes steadily. "I've been handling stock since I was old enough to walk, Mr. Mercer. My father broke horses for the Army remount station outside San Antonio for 20 years, and I broke them alongside him from the time I was 8, and I've yet to meet the animal that was born mean rather than made that way by somebody's hard hands. I'd wager your gray there was made, not born." Wade Mercer looked at the stallion pinning its ears at the far rail, and at the woman's steady, unhurried face, and at his own crew's smirking certainty that this would end exactly the way the last 6 attempts had ended. And something in him, worn down by 2 hard winters and a summer of failure, decided he had nothing left to lose by one more hour of it. "Half an hour," he said. "Not a full hour. I've got a banknote coming due in the fall, and I can't spare a whole morning to a demonstration, however it turns out. You get 30 minutes, and Dutch here will time it fair, and if you're not making progress by then, I'll thank you for the effort and send you on your way with a meal in you regardless." "30 minutes will do," said Louisa Rain, and unlatched the gate. The crew gathered along the rail expecting a repeat of the spring's 6 failures, and for the first several minutes, what they got looked, at first glance, like nothing at all. Louisa did not approach the horse directly. She walked to the center of the round pen, coiled riata at her hip, a hand-braided horsehair rope, old and supple with years of handling, the single most valuable thing she owned, and she simply stood there, sideways to the stallion, not looking at him directly, and waited. "She's just standing there," Dutch said, after a full 2 minutes. "Boss, she's just standing in the middle of the pen doing nothing." "Give her the time she asked for," Wade said. Though he was watching as closely as anyone at the rail, his hat pushed back, his own doubt plain on his face. The gray stallion watched her for a long while from the far rail, ears working, weight shifting. The wariness of an animal braced for the rope and the whip that experience had taught him always came next. And when neither came, when the woman in the center of the pen simply stood, patient, breathing slow, asking nothing of him at all, something in his stance began, by degrees too small for most of the watching men to name, to change. He took a step toward her, then another. By the 10th minute he had crossed half the pen on his own, unbidden, and stood watching her from 20 feet, and Louisa Rain had not moved from where she stood except to shift her weight, unhurried, patient, letting the horse do all the deciding. "What in God's name is she doing?" muttered Dutch. "She's letting him choose," Wade said slowly, understanding arriving in him the way understanding sometimes does, all at once after weeks of failing to see a thing plainly in front of him. "Every man who's gone in that pen this spring went in with a rope and a plan and a schedule to keep. She's not asking him for anything. She's just standing there being safe to be near." By the 20th minute the gray stud stood 4 feet from her, head low, and Louisa turned, slow and unhurried, and reached out one open hand, not toward his head, which every man who had tried before her had gone for first, but toward his shoulder, low and easy, the kind of touch a horse gives another horse rather than the kind a man imposes on livestock. The stallion did not startle. He stood, trembling faintly, and let her hand rest there, and by the 28th minute Louisa Rain had her father's old riata looped light and easy around his neck. Not a proper halter, not yet. Just a rope resting where he could feel its weight without fearing it, and the horse stood quiet in the center of the round pen, while 6 cowhands, who had each been thrown from that same animal, stood at the rail in a silence considerably louder than their earlier laughter had been. Wade Mercer did not say anything for a long moment after the 30 minutes had run out. He simply stood at the fence with his hat in his hands, turning it over slowly, watching a horse that had cost him $200 and a hands-broken wrist stand calm and unafraid beside a woman he had known less than an hour. "How," he said finally, "did you know he'd let you close that fast?" "I didn't know it. I hoped it, because I've seen the shape of what was done to him before, and hurt of that particular kind usually answers to patience faster than it answers to force, once somebody finally offers the patience instead of more force." Louisa kept her hand resting easy on the stallion's neck. "Somebody roped him hard and often, Miss Mercer, and likely whipped him besides, before he ever came to your outfit, And every man who's gone into that pen since has carried a rope and a plan same as the men who hurt him first. I didn't carry a plan. I just carried patience and let him work out for himself that I wasn't going to be what he expected. 6 men have tried this spring. Trained hands, good with stock, every one of them. 6 men who wanted to break him, Mr. Mercer, because that's the word this whole territory uses for it, and it's the wrong word entire. You don't break a horse like this one. You've got to gentle him, and gentling takes longer than breaking, and it looks like doing nothing to a man standing at a rail waiting for a show, right up until the moment it isn't nothing at all. Wade offered her the job before she'd finished coiling the riata back onto her hip, and he offered it plainly, without the hedging a man might reasonably use toward a stranger who'd walked in off the road that same morning. $30 a month and board, same as I pay any hand, and I'll not pretend that's generous given what you just did with an animal that's cost me $200 and half a summer's confidence. But it's what the outfit can bear right now. With the note coming due in the fall, and I'd rather tell you the truth of our situation than promise more than I can pay. $30 is fair, Miss Mercer, and I didn't come looking for charity. I came looking for honest work, and I'd rather know the truth of an outfit's troubles going in than discover them later. Louisa looked past him, toward the barn and the thin grazed pasture beyond it, taking the measure of the place with the same unhurried patience she'd shown the horse. You said a banknote in the fall. How bad is it, if you don't mind my asking a hand's question of her new employer on her first morning? Bad enough that this horse was meant to be the whole of the answer. He's out of the best running line in 3 territories, and if I could breed off him and sell the colts, I'd clear the note twice over inside 2 years. Instead, he's cost me money I didn't have to spend, and put a good hand out of work, and I've started to wonder some nights whether I bought myself a fine-blooded disaster instead of a fine-blooded stud. You bought yourself an animal somebody else ruined before you ever laid eyes on him, said Louisa, and I don't think that's the same thing as a disaster, Mr. Mercer. Give me the season. I'll have him gentled proper by August, and breeding ready besides, and you can judge for yourself then whether $30 a month was the worst bargain you ever struck. Dutch was the first of the crew to come around, which surprised nobody more than Dutch himself. He found Louisa at the round pen on the 4th morning, working a skittish 2-year-old through the same slow patience she'd shown the gray, and he stood at the rail a long while before he spoke. I laughed at you pretty hard that first morning, ma'am, and I want to say plain I was wrong to do it before I go another day without saying so. You weren't wrong to doubt me, Dutch. 6 men had already been thrown by that horse, and you'd no reason yet to think a stranger off the road would fare different. Louisa did not stop her work, though she softened toward him some in the saying. You'd have been a fool not to doubt, given what you'd already seen. I'd rather a man doubt me honest and come round honest after than pretend he believed all along. Pardo's wrist is healing, Dutch offered, awkward by way of peace. Doc says he'll be back to work by month's end. He'd want you to know that, I expect, seeing as it was that Gray put him down in the first place. I'm glad to hear it. Tell him, when he's back, I'll show him what I showed the horse, if he's willing to learn it. There's no shame in a bad throw, Dutch. There's only shame in never troubling to ask why it happened. She was as good as her word, and better, and the whole outfit watched it happen over the following weeks with the particular grudging respect ranch hands reserved for someone who has proven them wrong through work rather than argument. She did not use a whip on that horse, not once, in all the weeks that followed, and she did not use a heavy hand on any other animal on the place either, and by the 3rd week the crew had stopped laughing and started asking her opinion on their own difficult stock. a mare that wouldn't take a bit easy, a young gelding spooked bad by a rattlesnake the spring before, and Louisa answered every question with the same patient thoroughness she'd shown the gray. Wade found himself, more and more that summer, at the round pen fence in the evening, watching her work, and finding reasons to linger there past any reason connected to the ranch's actual business. "You handle him like he's already gentle," Wade said one evening in July, watching her saddle the gray for the first time, easy and unhurried, the horse standing quiet beneath her hands. "I handle him like I expect him to be gentle, which is a different thing, and horses know the difference in a man's hands better than most men credit." Louisa checked the cinch, unhurried. "My father used to say a horse will generally become whatever you expect of it, given enough time, because they read a person's certainty long before they read a person's rope. I expected this one to be gentle. Once he'd worked out I wasn't a threat, and he's obliged me." "Where did your father learn it?" 20 years at the Army remount, you said. 20 years. And a war before that, breaking cavalry mounts for men who needed a horse that wouldn't spook under fire." Something in Louisa's face went quieter, remembering he died 3 years back, and the remount station closed the year after, and I've been finding my own way since, one outfit at a time, looking for a place that would let a woman do the work instead of just admire it from a distance. That's a hard way to spend 3 years. It has been, some days. I've been turned away from more outfits than I can rightly count, most of them not troubling to hide their laughter the way yours did this morning at least. Louisa ran a hand along the riata coiled at her hip, the motion unconscious, worn smooth by habit. "This was my father's rope. He braided it himself from his own horse's tail hair over one whole winter, and told me a rope a man makes with his own hands will always answer him truer than one bought off a shelf. I've carried it every outfit since he died, and I confess there were nights on the road I wondered whether I was carrying a tool or just carrying his memory, unable to set either one down. And now? Now I think it was both all along, and I've stopped trying to tell the two apart." She looked over at the gray stallion, calm now in the far corner of the pen, cropping grass as though he had never known a rope to fear. "Some things a person carries turn out to be exactly what they're needed for, Mr. Mercer, if you're only patient enough to find the use." "You've found one," Wade said, and meant it more plainly than he'd intended to say aloud. The trouble at the Mercer place, when it came from inside the outfit, and it explained all at once the whole shape of the gray stallion's ruin. Cole Bragg had been Wade's foreman for 3 years, since before the uncle's death, kept on out of habit and a certain loyalty to the old man's judgment rather than any close examination of the new ones. And it was Louisa who first noticed, in August, that Bragg's accounts of feed and supply never quite matched what the barn actually held. "He's been buying grain at Denbrook's for the whole outfit," she told Wade, laying out 2 months of receipts against her own careful tally of what had actually gone into the feed bins, and there's near 1/5 of every order that never reaches this ranch at all. I'd guess it's going somewhere else entirely, and I'd guess further that whoever's paying him for the privilege of skimming your feed bill has an interest a good deal larger than 1/5 of your grain money. Wade confronted his foreman the same evening, in the barn, with Louisa standing a careful distance off, and Cole Bragg, cornered, did not deny it for long. "Denbrook's been paying me $1 a sack diverted, and it's more than you've paid me straight in 3 years combined," Bragg said, sullen. "You want to know why that gray never gentled for anybody but her, Mercer? I roped him hard every chance I got before you noticed, because Denbrook wants your breeding program dead so he can buy this outfit for 1/3 its worth when your note comes due in the fall, and a ruined stud was the surest way to see that happen without ever laying a hand on you directly. You did that to an animal on purpose, Louisa said, and her voice had gone flat and cold in a way neither man had heard from her before. You knew exactly what had already been done to him before he ever came to this outfit, and you chose to keep doing it, week after week, because a man in town was paying you $1 a sack to finish the ruining. It's just a horse. It was never just a horse to anybody who watched what those spring mornings cost him. Louisa's hands had gone still at her sides, the riata forgotten. I've spent 3 years since my father died looking for outfits honest enough to let me work. Mister, Bragg and I have met a great many hard men in that time who I disagreed with plainly and respected anyway, because hard is not the same as cruel. What you did to that stallion was cruel, and I find I have very little patience left for a man who'll break a good animal for $1 a sack and call the breaking somebody else's business. Bragg had no answer to that, and Wade did not wait for one. Wade turned him off the ranch within the hour and rode to town the next morning with Louisa beside him, because she had insisted on coming, and because he had learned, over one long summer, that her judgment on matters of this kind was worth considerably more than his own temper alone. They found Amos Denbrook at his own feed store, and Wade laid the receipts on the counter without preamble. You've been paying my foreman to sabotage my breeding stock and skim my accounts besides, hoping to break this outfit before the fall note comes due, and I've got the paper to prove every dollar of it. Denbrook's composure did not so much as flicker. That's a serious accusation, Mercer, built on the word of a foreman I've never met, and a hired woman with no more standing in this county than the horse she gentled. It's built on receipts in your own clerk's hand, matched against feed that never reached my barn, and on a former foreman who's already told the whole of it plain, having nothing left to protect once you'd already used him up. Louisa set her own tally beside Wade's receipts. Unhurried, you wanted that ranch bad enough to ruin a horse for it, Mr. Denbrook, and I'd guess the county bank would find that a curious thing to hear about, given they're the ones holding the note you're hoping to profit from. The bank, when the whole of it reached them by way of the county sheriff, took considerably less kindly to a scheme built on ruining collateral than Denbrook had evidently anticipated, and the note's terms were quietly extended through the following spring, once the president understood the full shape of what had nearly happened. Denbrook's own credit soured fast once the story got round, the way such things always did in a county where every rancher depended on the same handful of neighbors' good opinion, and he sold his feed business within the year and left for Cheyenne, considerably poorer in reputation than he'd ever been in money. The gray stallion, gentled fully by September and standing stud by the following spring, sired 6 colts in his first season that fetched prices Wade Mercer had not dared hope for even in his best imaginings, and the Mercer place cleared its note before the second winter came, with grass to spare and a herd rebuilding steady under careful management. Wade found Louisa at the round pen fence on the evening the last colt was born, healthy and strong-legged in the September dusk, and he stood beside her a long while before either of them spoke. "I offered you $30 a month on your first morning here," he said finally, "and told you honestly it wasn't generous, given what you'd just done. I find I owe you a great deal more than a hand's wages now, Louisa, and I don't rightly know how a man offers a woman what she's actually worth to an outfit she's saved twice over, once from a ruined stud and once from a foreman's sabotage besides. You don't owe me anything beyond what you've already paid, Wade. I came for honest work, And I got it. And I've had the best season of my working life, proving what my father taught me was worth something beyond one man's memory of it. I'm not talking about wages. He turned to face her properly. I'm asking whether you'd consider staying on this ranch not as a hired hand, but as its mistress, because I've spent all summer watching you gentle a ruined horse with nothing but patience and certainty. And I find I've come to want exactly that same patience turned toward the whole of my life, not just the stock in my round pen. Louisa Rain looked at him a long moment in the fading light. Her father's riata coiled easy at her hip the way it had been every day since she'd ridden into that yard. That, she said, is a considerably better offer than $30 a month. I've had all summer to improve on the first one. Then yes, said Louisa, though I'll tell you plainly, Wade Mercer, I mean to go on gentling every difficult animal this outfit ever takes in, husband or no husband, because it's the one thing in this world I know how to do exactly right, and I don't intend to trade it for a ring. I wouldn't ask you to trade it, Wade said. I've watched what that patient's built this summer. I'd be a fool to want less of it in my house than I've already got in my round pen. They were married that November in the small church at the county seat, with the gray stallion's first colt already weaned and running in the near pasture, and half the outfit's hand-standing witness who had, 6 months before, laughed at a woman claiming she could handle stock nobody else could touch. Dutch, who had laughed loudest that first morning, gave the toast at the wedding supper, and made a point, with considerable good humor, of admitting he'd been wrong about most things that sprang, though never once, he added, about the entertainment value of watching a man's whole certainty come apart in 30 minutes flat. Pardo, wrist healed and back at work since July, stood beside him and raised his glass to the gray stallion instead of the bride, which got the biggest laugh of the whole evening, and which Louisa said afterward was exactly the kind of toast that horse had actually earned. The following spring, the round pen at the Mercer Ranch held a new arrival most mornings. Young stock sent over from 3 neighboring outfits, once word had spread of what patient hands could accomplish with animals other men had given up on. And Louisa Mercer worked each one the same unhurried way she'd worked the gray, letting every animal choose its own way toward trust rather than forcing the choosing on it. Denbrook's old feed store is up for sale again, Wade said, joining her at the fence one warm morning, the post still in his hand. 3rd owner in 2 years. Seems nobody who buys a business built on another man's ruin manages to keep it standing very long. I find I'm not moved to pity him. Louisa did not look up from the yearling she was gentling, her father's riata resting light around its neck exactly as it had rested around the gray's that first June morning. He wanted this ranch bad enough to ruin a good horse getting it, and he lost considerably more than the horse in the end. And the horse? Louisa glanced past her husband to where the gray stallion stood grazing easy in the near pasture. Sire now to 11 foals and gentle as any horse on the place, trusted enough that their own daughter, not yet 2 years old, had already been lifted onto his broad back for her first sitting, laughing, entirely unafraid. The horse, said Louisa Mercer, turned out to be exactly what he was always capable of being, once somebody finally gave him the 30 minutes it took to prove it. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where patience proved stronger than force, and a woman's quiet certainty turned a whole ranch's fortune around before sundown, then this story was for you. Out on the grass below the Wind River Range, where the wind keeps the only memory of what was, the love between Wade Mercer and Louisa Rain became the kind that does not need anyone to remember it to be real, though the whole county remembers still and tells it the same way every time that she asked for 1 hour and needed only half of it. If stories of frontier love and quiet hard-won courage speak to you, follow the lonesome trail for more. Here, the love stories are gentle, the patience is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.